Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church in Columbia, South Carolina, where we're part of the ELCA. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. When Isaac Watts wrote the hymn, O God, our help in ages past, he drew his inspiration from Psalm 90. It's a psalm and a hymn that speaks eloquently of God's help through all of life's difficulties and trials, and that God will see us through them. This is one of my favorite hymns to use at funerals, the words offering us comfort in the midst of our grief. You may remember one particular verse. Time, like an ever-rolling stream, bears all our years away. They fly forgotten as a dream dies at the opening of day. Gathered together, we acknowledge the reality of death. And there, in the very face of death, we remind ourselves of the hope we have in God. This week, following our observance of All Saints Sunday, we are considering how the Bible views death and what the Bible tells us about death. The thing is, the Bible never shrinks from facing the reality that part of life is death. One place we can look is to the beautiful poetry found in Ecclesiastes, where the preacher says, For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die. In fact, it would be my belief that part of what the preacher means here is that we have a limited span of life, and the best way to spend that small amount of time is to live it dedicating oneself to God in God's way. Frankly, in that way, the fact that our life is limited in some way helps give our lives meaning and purpose. Death is part of the human experience. Through all its pages, the Bible acknowledges that death is inevitable. I've even heard it described that life is a terminal condition. It does not help us to bury our heads in the sand and pretend that death isn't a reality that we will all face. The Bible faces this truth with open and frank eyes, and with the hope we have in God, stares it down. That's the promise of salvation we have in Jesus. In seminary, I learned to consider Jesus' death and resurrection as one event, even though they happened on different days. They are in some ways two sides of the same coin. Together they are one event that brings about our salvation. Nevertheless, there is something of a distinction between the two, and maybe you've never really realized this. Jesus' death on the cross means the overcoming of sin. Jesus rising from the tomb means the overcoming of death. In the one event, we are given forgiveness and new life. We can stare death in the face and begin again because of the love of Jesus. God is our help in ages past and our hope for years to come. I remember when I was in high school that one of my close friends had a sister who was killed in a car accident. When they were holding the visitation in the funeral home, my group of friends and I gathered to go in and comfort our friend. We stood outside the door for a moment, and then one of my friends looked at me and said, "This is your area, Gary. You take the lead." I turned and headed in the door immediately, with them trailing behind. It wasn't a fearful situation for me. As a pastor's kid and leaning that way myself, I had faced the reality of death many times. There was no need to fear. I had confidence in Christ, and we all can. There is one more aspect that we need to consider here. We've talked about facing the reality of death when one of our loved ones dies. We also can have that confidence when we are facing our own deaths too. The Bible is open and frank that death comes to us all. But again, we have confidence in Christ, because in Christ life comes as well. At Redeemer, when we have a funeral, our worship folder has on the front page, on the cover, a phrase that I hope helps us remember all of this. It says, the funeral worship, celebrating the life and new life of such and so a person. Life and new life. It's God's gift. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.